Okay, hey guys, I'm delighted in a moment to introduce you to a long-term friend and mentor of mine, Keith J. Cunningham. Keith is seen as a foremost authority on business mastery. He's got more than 45 years of business and investing experience teaching critical business skills. Tony Robbins says Keith Cunningham is a national treasure. I would move heaven and earth to work with him. And that was how I was fortunate to meet Keith almost 15 years ago. And he's been the single biggest influence on my business career. So I'm delighted that he's taken some time with us today to talk about a critical topic, which is, well, business skills and planning, how to create an effective plan for your business to scale it into the future. So, Keith, thank you for joining us.
Dan, thank you. It is such a privilege to do this with you, and just so I just so I get this in and say it, the work you've done, the progress you've made, the commitment that you have to growth and excellence and mastery, really, really impressive. I've been watching some of your videos online. And I want you to know that I learn something every time I watch. So thank you for the work you do. I'm very appreciative.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll definitely take that compliment. So, Keith, in my 20 years in business, of the many things that I've learned from you, and we'll definitely talk about financial literacy, which totally shifted my world. But perhaps the single biggest one is the concept of thinking time, a topic that you go into in great depth in your one of your books, The Road Less Stupid. But what is thinking time for those that aren't familiar? What is thinking time? And could you tell us the story of how you came about it? How did you discover it?
You know, Dan, there's an international best-selling book that has been around for over 80 years. It's been translated into 100 languages. It's sold over 100 million copies. Everybody has heard of it. A few of us have bought it. Even fewer of us have read it. And the name of the book is Think and Grow Rich. The name of the book is not Dim the Lights, Hold Hands, Sing Kumbaya, and a sack full of money will fall on your head. That's not the name of the book. The idea is, I think, that most people use their emotion, their gut, and their glands to make what should be an intellectual decision. In fact, if I look back on my investing and business career, at the root of all of my mistakes, at the root of all my dumb tacks, this is when I do something stupid and it costs me some money. There's three common denominators at the root of all of my problems. I think these are the same three common denominators for you and the group that's listening to this. And the three things are excessive optimism, unexamined assumptions, ignored risk. Excessive optimism, unexamined assumptions, and ignored risk. And the reality is all of those are about emotions and gut and glands. I happen to believe that business is an intellectual sport. It's not a sport that responds well to getting jacked up or overly excited. You know, if I think about Warren Buffett, right before he goes into a board meeting or right before he makes a critical decision, the thing he doesn't do is stand in his chair and beat his chest and scream at the top of his lungs, because that's putting him into an emotional state And in an emotional state, we're going to have excessive optimism, unexamined assumptions, and ignored risk. My experience is, if I gave you the opportunity to unwind any 3 financial decisions you've ever made, how much money would you have right now? And I don't want you to answer that out loud. I just want you to think about it. If you could unwind any 3 financial decisions, most of us would say, oh man, Keith, I'd have 2 times, 5 times, 10 times more money if I could have just avoided the dumb stuff. So it turns out that the key to getting rich is to avoid doing stupid things. And most of us think the key to being successful or getting rich is finding more smart things to do. The reality is, fewer stupid things will actually increase my net worth and my success. So this idea that business is an intellectual sport is critical. If I ask you to look at your diary, look at your calendar every day for the last 12 months. So you leaf through your calendar, or if you don't use a paper calendar, if you're like most people and you're on some sort of computer program, if you looked at every single day, how many entries would you find where you had set aside time to think? We set aside time to do. We set aside time to meet. We set aside time to have telephone calls, but we don't set aside time to think, and yet business is an intellectual sport, and the name of the book is Think and Grow Rich. So this concept of thinking time first was brought to my attention because years ago, like a lot of years ago, 40 years ago, as a matter of fact, I was doing a deal, a big deal. I was raising money for a business we were going to buy, and I was on Wall Street with all the investor and investment banks, and I was meeting with a very, very well-known, influential, very successful man who was, I thought, going to fund my deal. It turns out he did wind up funding our acquisition. In the middle of the meeting, this was in Los Angeles, in the middle of the meeting, there was a knock on the door, and the financier that I'm meeting with held up his finger and said, "Give me 1 minute." He looked at the guy at the door and said, "What is it?" And the guy at the door said, "We need a decision on the financing for another project that he was doing." And the financier that I'm sitting with said, "Okay, give me 1 minute." He puts his glasses on. He gets out his little paper day timer, where he just kind of kept his schedule. He flipped a couple pages. He made a little entry, and he looked at the guy at the door and said, "The next time I'm scheduled to think is between 3 a.m. and 5 a.m. on Tuesday morning. You'll have an answer at 5 a.m. I went, "Oh, seriously?" What was impressive is not the time that he was going to do the thinking, it's that he did thinking time. He set aside time to think, and that concept had never occurred to me before. And I went, if business is an intellectual sport, and if our emotions are the saboteurs, then maybe thinking time is a skill that I need to develop. Now, I don't know about you, but I've had the experience of learning something and then forgetting to use it. I think that happens to most people. Well, this is one of those things that I learned and I forgot to use until years later after some more dumb tacks. And I recalled this guy and that whole conversation, and so I sat down to try to think, and I wound up taking a nap. And so I thought, well, maybe I was just tired. So I sat down to think again, and I took another nap. And I came to the conclusion, I don't know how to think. So I called this guy on the phone. It's now been 10 years since I had learned this. I called this guy on the phone, and I said, I'm trying this thinking time thing that I learned from you, and I'm really struggling. I don't know how to do it. And he said, there's 3 keys to being successful at thinking time. You want to know what they are? And I nodded my head. Yes, I want to know. He said, number 1, start with a great question. Can't do thinking time unless you start with a great question. So I wrote that down. I got it. The quality of my thinking is dictated by the quality of my questions. That was number 1. Number 2, he said, you have to get very still with your body, and you got to cut off all outside stimulus. So you can't do thinking time at a computer. You can't do thinking time on your iPhone. You got to have a pen and a piece of paper. And you get away from your phone, your computer, distractions, and get your body very, very still. In fact, when I do thinking time, I typically have my left hand over my eyes, so I'm not tempted to be looking around and oh God, I forgot I had that book. Oh, wait a minute, there's some dust right there in the corner. I get all distracted, and quality thinking time means I'm going to narrow my focus, get very still. So number 1, start with a great question. Number 2, get very still, eliminate all distractions. Number 3, always have an empty dot on your page, an empty dot. So if I have a great question and I write down a possibility, that's all I'm doing. I'm not saying this is the right answer. I'm just saying, here's an idea. So I write it down, and the next thing I do is put an empty dot on my piece of paper. Well, that empty dot tells my brain, oh, there must be something else. There must be another possibility. And so then I'll write something down for that, and I'll have an empty dot. And the key is continue to keep an empty dot on your page, and don't be afraid to have a little time go by, maybe a minute or 2 where you're not writing. It's okay. You just say, what else could it be? What else could it be? And we're not trying to find the right answer. We're trying to find the most answers. That's really important. One of my mentors told me 50 years ago, he said, Keith, do you know how to have a great idea? I said, no. How do you do that, Jack? He said, you have a lot of ideas and then pick the best one. That's how you have a great idea. So what I'm wanting in thinking time is a lot of ideas, and I'll cull those ideas when my thinking time is finished. And the way I know my thinking time is finished is because I've set an alarm for 30 minutes or 40 minutes or 45 minutes. I rarely do a thinking time beyond 45 minutes. And when that alarm goes off, I'm always startled. I always go, God, that went by quick. And I stop and I go back through all the answers that I come up with, possibilities, and I eliminate the ones that are, they're not that good. Some of them are really bad. And I find the 1 or 2 possibilities that might need another thinking time, or they might need some real execution because I've come up with a pretty good answer. This idea of thinking time, Dan, I'm glad you're talking about this because I think it is probably the singularly most important tool that business owners could have. When I read about Bill Gates or Warren Buffett, they continually refer to this idea of setting aside time where they're not solving a problem, they're not in a meeting, they're not, trying to devise a strategy. They say, let me start with a question.
Mm-hmm.
I do it 3 times a week. I do it for 45 minutes a session. And I think if you don't have thinking time as part of your regular calendar, start with one. Just start with one. And let's see whether or not you come up with some insights and possibilities that weren't obvious when you started. So that's a little bit about thinking time. Great question. Thank you.
Keith, it's so huge for me. I'm sat right now, and I want the people listening to this know I took Keith literally. It's detailed in depth in The Road Less Stupid, which, by the way, I've got multiple copies of this book, and there rarely is there one copy of this book more than arm's reach away from me, because it's full of great thinking time questions. But it reminds me of a quote. So I took Keith literally. So I've got a thinking time chair, Keith, in that corner over there, and I only sit there when I'm thinking and doing my notes. And it's hard. So I want people listening to know that I think the quotes from the late Charlie Munger, who very sadly we recently lost, to a great man, who says, it's not supposed to be easy. Anyone who says it's easy is stupid. And I find that to be just spot on. It's the value that the business gets added to the business comes from the high quality thinking. And there's another quote, it's in your book, Keith, but it's a quote from Warren Buffett. The discipline of thinking time. I insist a lot of time being spent thinking almost every day, just to sit and think. This is very uncommon in American business. I read and think, etc. And he goes on, and that's Warren Buffett. And so, Keith, my next question is, on the wall behind me, Keith, I have pictures to remind me of people that have mentored me, and you've got Pride of Place right here. But just over here, Keith, there is a picture and a quote from Warren Buffett that says, "An idiot with a plan can beat a genius without a plan." And I know you say, Keith, plan or get slaughtered. So my question is, why is planning underestimated and underappreciated by entrepreneurs who want to grow their business?
It's a great question. I think what most people do is use the word wish, goal, and plan interchangeably. I'll put it on a bumper sticker. A description of the destination is not a substitute for the roadmap. Edward Deming, an American who transformed Japan right after World War II and launched Japan on a migration from cheap little products to Six Sigma technology. Edward Deming said, if you can't describe your plan, you don't know what you're doing.
Right.
I think what most people do is they step on the bathroom scales, they don't like the number, and they mentally say, you know what, I wish I weighed 5 pounds less. Oh, I know what I'll do. I'll make that a goal. And so they have now a goal, but they don't really have a plan to achieve that goal because they haven't thought through the obstacles that are in the way. Most people that have a plan of losing 5 pounds, have a wish of losing 5 pounds, have had that wish before and it failed, which is why most people make the same New Year's resolution over and over and over again. It's not because they didn't wish that it was different. It's not because they don't have a goal. It's because they don't have a plan that accommodates or deals with the obstacles that are in the way that are preventing the forward progress or preventing achievement of that goal. In other words, they don't have a plan. They just have a wish. I'm good if people want to keep doing goal setting. Goal setting is something you can see. A target is something you can hit. So right now, I'm going to say something that will probably be a little controversial to your audience, but nevertheless, it's true. You're talking to me right now while I am in South Texas on my annual hunting. I'm a hunter. For those of you that are appalled by that, let me just say I eat what I kill. I every year have a goal of harvesting a trophy. It's a serious goal. I take this very seriously. If the animal I want, the deer that I want, shows up 1,000 yards away, I don't have a weapon that can shoot 1,000 yards. So it's still a goal. A goal is something I can see. A target is something I can hit. It's a huge distinction. And what most people do is set goals without simultaneously creating the plan or the machine that will allow them to turn that goal into a target. And so this idea that if you think about the mistakes that you've made in business, more likely than not, the bulk of those mistakes are a result of executing on an idea and not a plan. So a plan will lay out, here's exactly what needs to happen in order to get from here to there. Here's the obstacles that are in the way and what needs to happen to overcome the obstacles that are in the way. So I want you to think about it this way. This is the goal. This is reality. And what we want to do is get from reality of where we are and make forward progress to what we want. If I ask people, in fact, I'm going to do it. If I ask people right now, you're listening to me, I want you on a piece of paper to write down one of the 3 biggest business problems you have right now. So literally, I want you to do it. Start writing down one of the 3 biggest business problems you have right now. Okay, that's it. That's it. Time's up. Stop writing. I don't care if you finished. We've done what I wanted to do. I ask you to write down one of your 3 biggest problems, and what every single person does when I say that is they write down the gap between where they are and what they want. Well, I don't have enough cash, or I wish my cash was 100,000 pounds higher, or I have a lousy culture, or I don't have the right people on my team, or I don't have enough customers, or I've got enough customers, but I suck at keeping those customers. We start writing down all of these obvious tactical things. And my question is, why do those exist? What's the obstacle that's preventing more cash, that's preventing more customers, that's preventing me from having the right people on the team? In other words, if I'm going to build a plan to get from where I am to what I want, I've got to take into consideration the obstacles that are in the way that are preventing my forward progress. And I will tell you that in my thinking times, probably the single most common thinking time is around what is the real, true obstacle or problem that's in the way. Really and truly, what is the problem? If I don't do that, then I step on the bathroom scales and say I weigh 5 pounds too much. Oh, I know what I'll do. I'll make that a goal. And the first thing I do is I say, well, I tell you what, in order to achieve this goal, what I need to do is buy a new pair of Nike tennis shoes. And I need to join a gym. And if I just had a Peloton in my home, then I could get in shape. Or I tell you what, I do a lot of travel. So if I just had a jump rope that I could pack in my suitcase, and so all of those things are very tactical. But the truth is, not one of those things is going to be the critical driver that causes me to lose 5 pounds. Not one of them. If owning a Peloton would allow me to get in shape, then owning 5 Pelotons would allow me to be in next year's Olympics. It doesn't work that way. So we wind up being tactical instead of strategic, and strategic requires that I understand the obstacles that are in the way. I understand the environment that I'm in. There's a lot of people that are disappointed right now with their financial results, and that disappointment stems from coming off of a bumper year or two where maybe COVID was a miracle. It was a miracle of COVID. And now all of a sudden they're not able to sustain that same kind of rhythm. Now, this isn't everybody. Some people got, really whacked during COVID, but others did really, really well. And now things are kind of returning to normal, and they're frustrated. And part of that frustration is they're ignoring the environment. One of my favorite bumper stickers is, not all progress can be measured by ground gained. Sometimes progress is measured by losses avoided. And so the decisions we choose to make and how we choose to execute has a lot to do with whether or not the targets or the goals that we have are realistic. I will tell you this, Dan. In my life, I have 0 goals. 0. All of my businesses, all of my personal life is built around this idea of targets. Targets are something I can hit. Targets require that I build a very robust yellow brick road. How do I get from Munchkinville to Oz? And there's going to be some flying monkeys. There's going to be a wicked witch of the east. There's going to be all these bad things that I'm going to encounter. Those are potential obstacles in the way. And what I need to do is develop a plan that Mike Tyson said it best. Mike Tyson said, everybody's got a plan until I punch them in the nose. Mm-hmm. And what we fail to do is think about what are the punches in the nose that we're likely to receive in the process of executing on this plan. And how can I have a target that is not a target that says, here's the gap between where I am and what I want? That's obvious. What's not obvious is what's the obstacle that's preventing me from getting closer to what I want. How do I get closer to what I want? And so most CEOs have had this experience. They have a they have a seizure, and they go, I tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to grow this business by 22% next year. And so they write an email, they call a town hall, they get a meeting, and they announce to their team, our goal for this next year is 22% growth. If you've ever written that email, you've lost your mind. That is a stupid thing to do, because all you've done is announced an outcome without giving the team the plan, the obstacle, the metrics, the executables that will allow them to get from where they are closer to the 22% that you've announced. So if we're going to announce 22%, let's make sure that it contains a robust plan that is not a description of the destination, but rather a well thought out yellow brick road that moves the needle and overcomes the obstacle that's in the way. Here's the final thing I'll say on that, unless you have a follow-up question. My experience is that I'm unable to name a single business that has failed as a result of a lack of vision or goals. I can't name one. I read 3 books a week. I have for 35 years. I'm unaware of a single business that failed for a lack of vision. CEOs are incredible at describing their vision, their mission. Okay, I realize you got to have a North Star. I get that. But every business, without exception, that I know that's failed has failed as a result of a lack of execution. It turns out execution is putting rubber on the road consistently and getting better at what you do. And most people, most CEOs spend the majority of their time daydreaming about what they want as opposed to executing on the stuff that's in front of them that helps them overcome the obstacles that are in the way. So that's why the name of the course is Plan or Get Slaughtered.
Thank you, Keith. I absolutely love this. I hope you enjoyed that episode. 3 things you need to do now. Number 1, make sure you subscribe to this podcast so you do not miss an episode. Also, get on over to Amazon to get a copy of my latest book, Turnover is Vanity, Profit is Sanity, 9.5 Steps to Improving Your Profits and Cash Flow. Also, join our Facebook group, the Turnover is Vanity, Profit is Sanity community, to connect with other business owners.